Well, jeepers! You're listening to Smash or Pass.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another interview on the JayBee and Milly channel. I am JayBee, and of course, with me is Milly.
Hi.
And the special guest who will be interviewing today is Len Uhley. Thank you so much for joining.
Thank you so much for inviting me. It's a pleasure to chat with you. And you've worked with, I don't know how many of my colleagues over the years in your interviews. So glad to be part of the team.
So, on IMDb, I can see that one of the first credits for you is Holmes and Yo-Yo in 1976. But before that point, what really started your journey into wanting to become a writer and go into all that?
Well, I can talk about both of those things. As I've said on other interviews, I wanted to be a writer before I knew I wanted to be a writer. The first script in a box somewhere is a Star Trek script I wrote in sixth grade for an English class. And subsequently started doing student films. Once I got to high school, more student films, writing musical reviews, sketches, that sort of thing. Once I got to film school at UCLA, my project one, the sort of the first major film one makes there, that was a 9-minute one song Super 8 musical. So basically, you know, through high school and college, I hear people laughing and applauding, and I say, wait, I should do this for a living. You know, like I've also said, never let a 17-year-old figure out what you should do for the rest of your life, because, you know, it's kind of a dicey proposition, but it all worked out sort of in a strange way. Anyway, so yeah, I started writing spec scripts while I was at college, and then the first professional credit was on Holmes and Yo-Yo, which was on the ABC television network here for 13 glorious weeks. The interesting part of that was it was made by the same people who had done Get Smart. You're too young to remember, but Get Smart was a very important show for me growing up. It was my idea of what funny was. It was a spy spoof. And so anyway, I ended up working for those guys. I was 20, turning 21. I was a junior in college, and I did not know what I was doing. I actually did a fairly terrible job, but it was a first credit. And so that, and then the following year, just as I was graduating from college, I ended up creating a TV series format, which is not even a series Bible, for a show about the first Black president of the United States. You know, like that could happen. But it was 1977, so I was a little ahead of my time. Anyway, so another professional writer got to write that because I only had one credit. And the show never went on to series, obviously. But it was 2 credits before I was graduating college. So I said, oh, this is going to be easy. And then that was followed by 3 years of utter radio silence. Nothing happened whatsoever. So, as I've said elsewhere, basically, I am a 10-year overnight success. I was a precocious and then a struggling sitcom writer and bumped around getting the occasional assignment and things like that, trying to write movies and TV shows, and then was writing corporate films and industrials, sort of like, The Wonder and the Glory of Nissan Cars or something like that. And one of the companies I worked for was the mom and pop company, one of the smaller companies. The pop was the voice of Duke Igthorn on Disney's Adventures of the Gummy Bears, Michael Rye. So Michael introduced me to the story editor on the Gummy Bears at Disney. We're in the mid-'80s now. And I did one freelance Gummy Bears, I did one freelance DuckTales, and then because Disney was hiring people left and right to ramp up on DuckTales and then subsequently on the Disney Afternoon, I got hired there. I spent 5.5 years at Disney. And then after I left Disney, I had people I had gotten to know there were doing superhero stuff. So I got to do superhero stuff. So I was bouncing between funny animals and people in long underwear and preschool and Bible adventure. I'm basically in America, we call that a utility infielder. I can play any position. Just tell me what you need and I'll do my best to do it. So that's how I ended up doing this silly job for way too long.
I mean, it certainly has been an amazing career, and there's so many things you're excited to focus in on a little bit more. But it was really interesting how you're saying one of the first scripts was inspired by was it Star Trek or Star Wars? I've always got the two confused, and I meant to say Star Trek then.
Star Trek, love Star Wars too. Never have written on any of the Star Wars animated series or anything like that, and certainly not on the features. But yeah, it was Star Wars. That was the first script I wrote when I was a kid, and the second thing I did in animation was a DuckTales episode called "Where No Duck Has Gone Before." Basically, this is kind of a running theme, and you know, for those of us who are fans of various iterations of that series, you know, it pops up every once in a while. You know, I know people who are working on, you know, Strange New Worlds and other Star Trek shows, and you know, I envy them tremendously because it's a favorite franchise. But you know, we can talk about some of the favorite franchises I worked for in animation, which were also a good thing. So you know, ask away and I'll see what I can, you know, what I don't know I can make up. Okay.
That's
Fair enough.
amazing. That's amazing. Thank you. And again, sorry about that. My dad used to love both, and me growing up just remembered it as the two star things because it was on whenever I was about to go to bed and get to watch the movies he wanted. And so I've always just had that confusion between the two in my head. And yeah, no, I do appreciate that. So thank you. But like you said, you know, that certainly was a big inspiration for you quite early on. Were there any other shows that you remember particularly enjoying, or, you know, the kind of narrative of them, or any writers in particular you enjoyed?
Gosh, okay, well, I will be dating myself, showing how old I am, but you know, when I was growing up, one of the biggest cartoon shows going was called The Adventures of Rocky and Bullwinkle. And that was, you know, just so smart, very rudimentary animation, but brilliantly written. And so that taught me, you know, what funny was, along with Get Smart and some of the other shows. I grew up in Los Angeles, and more specifically, I grew up kind of on the wrong side of the tracks in Beverly Hills. So it was a very weird place to grow up. So had I grown up in Detroit, I would have, you know, gone to work for the Ford Motor Company. But instead, I grew up here, and this is a weird company town too. So a lot of the people I grew up with were the sons and daughters of people in the entertainment industry. So, you know, some of my heroes happened to be the parents of my childhood friends. I mean, one of the earliest people who kind of encouraged me was a guy named Herbie Baker. Now, he may not be a familiar name to you, but Herbie was the head writer on some variety shows like The Flip Wilson Show, and he'd done features like the Matt Helm movies and things like that. So Herbie, you know, was one of the people who said, you can keep trying to do this. Another friend, Doug Denoff, his dad, Sam Denoff, was one of the Persky and Denoff who were writers on the Dick Van Dyke Show. So I'm seeing these people who are doing this for a living, and I'm saying, oh, wow, what could be so hard about that? Well, what can be hard about it is actually it's impossible to do it, but it seemed like it was an achievable goal. And because I grew up in this weird environment, you know, and strangely enough, due to, you know, connections of family people who knew people, I got to visit the sets of lots of old TV shows that were being made when I was a kid, 10, 11 years old. So I went to the set of My Favorite Martian. I went to the set of Batman and the Green Hornet. I never got to Star Trek, but you know, The Outer Limits, The Man from U.N.C.L.E., these are shows that, you know, I watched as a kid, and I got to see, you know, what it's like, you sort of, you know, how they make the sausage. And so it made perfect sense for a person. I wasn't in a showbiz family, but I was sort of showbiz adjacent. I often have said I am like the Zelig of the entertainment industry, just on the periphery of the heart of it. But, you know, managed to sort of, you know, run circles around it and occasionally, you know, be involved with it. And then, you know, I got this weird career, not the career I expected. I wanted to be a sitcom writer. You know, when I was in film school, you know, everybody else wanted to write the screenplay that changed the world. I wanted to be a sitcom guy because to my eye, the most fun in that you could possibly do is watch 4 cameras dance around a soundstage on a Friday night. It's like opening night. Every week you're doing a new play. So that sounded wonderful to me. As it turned out, I didn't do that so much, but I did end up doing this cartoon thing for umpty decades. And the opening night there was on the occasions when I was on staff, but even sometimes when I was a freelancer, I could go to a recording session. And so you're sitting there watching these extraordinarily talented, funny people say your words and make them better, make them funnier or more. And so that was a different kind of opening night, and it was a spectacular experience. Getting to see, especially early on, the voices of the voice actors who I had grown up listening to as a kid. Like on Gummy Bears, there was June Foray, who was the voice of Rocky and Bullwinkle, and Bill Scott early on was the voice of Bullwinkle, and then subsequent actors took over, and it was just like it was wild and weird, and I was very, very fortunate. Is the short version.
See, that's incredible, especially when you mention sitcoms, because if there's one thing that really attracts me to sitcoms, it's that ensemble cast. And it's just how all the characters can interact with each other, the snark that they have, and that reminds me quite a bit of, say, something like the X-Men. For all you'd think that they were such different things, like just that team dynamic did give off some very sitcom vibes. And the X-Men is a series that inspired me to want to start writing as well. I've not had anything published, but I dabble. But a lot of people watching this have no doubt been inspired to write as well. We have people writing fan fiction to share in these
Sure.
comment sections. So what would your advice be to people watching that want to get into writing?
It's completely different. That first job I got on Holmes and Yo-Yo, I saw the show got picked up. I read about it in the trade papers, and I called the production office. I said, "May I read a copy of your pilot script?" And they said, "Sure." And I went by and I picked up a copy of the pilot script, and I, wrote my own that they subsequently bought and revised. This would never happen today. There are so many layers of people who are there to say, "No, what are you, crazy?" And so, the business is very, very different. I got in at a good time in the mid-'80s in animation, where there was a lot of work to be had, and they were hiring left and right. Unfortunately, right now, this minute, it is a very challenging environment. As you know, we had a couple of strikes that changed the way the business is done. There was this great rush of programming being done for streamers, which was great, except it was unsustainable, and it was based on a business model that doesn't really make sense. The Netflix model barely works for Netflix. They'll be fine. All those people in charge, they're great, but the people who make the product are having a very hard time now. Not to be too much of a downer, anybody that wants to write, if I can't talk you out of it, this is what happens when I meet with young writers, then you may have a shot at it. But right now, with the contraction in the business, in the short term, it is a huge challenge. Having said that, if this is what you want to do, and I joke is I have no other skills, but the fact is, if this is something that you desperately need to do, then you can pursue your career. You can write samples, original things, or samples of other people's shows. That's great. It's great practice for you. And if you're able to do the impossible again and get representation, that material allows your representatives to go in and say, "Look what he or she has done. They've written these pilots. They wrote that movie and that other movie and that other movie too. And look, they even wrote episodes of the show you're doing. Give them a look." If it were easy, more people would be doing it. But it's always possible. It's a matter of doing all the stuff that it's dumb luck, timing, who you know, and talent in any order you like. But you really do have to put in the work. That was the mistake I made early on. I figured, I wrote that, and I wrote this other thing. So why aren't I being discovered? Because you have to do the work. You have to keep turning out new samples. You have to network. It may sound like a dirty word, but you have to get to know other people who are at your level. But it is harder now. It is much harder now. There is work being done. There are shows being made, but nobody really knows what the new normal is going to be. And so sorry to bring the conversation down, but we are in a period of transition now. I am told that there will be a new normal. It will not be as big and crazy as the peak TV period that we just lived through, but there will be a point where things sort of settle down, 6 months, 9 months, a year. In the meantime, your listeners who are interested in writing should just keep writing and studying other people's scripts and just keep at it, and eventually something will happen or not, but you've got to be prepared. You can't sit in your room as I have done in the past and sort of say, well, it's about time I got a career going. It's not. There's no easy answer to it outside of just nose to grindstone and keep at it and develop a thick skin, because yes, rejection is a large part of it. Anyway, I've gone on too long and depressed many of your listeners. So we can talk about something more cheerful now, if you like.
Oh, of course. I mean, you don't need to apologize for that at all, because it is simply, the reality of at least what we're seeing on our end as well. So we can't even imagine what it's like to be in it. Like, on the Scooby front, there's been like 3 cancelled Scooby Doo projects that we know of, 2 of which were like 90% completed. One was actually completed. So even if a writer can get through all that stage, in the climate we're in now, it's not even certain that it's gonna come out. So yeah, like there's no problem at all. It is just the reality of the current day, and hope things get better eventually. So thank you so much for sharing that with us.
The only thing you have control over is the turning out the product that represents you in the best light possible. None of us has any control over the business machinations. I don't know any of these CEOs. They're all going to be fine. They all have silly amounts of money coming in. And the rest of us are sitting here saying, please, sir, may I have another? So it's like the only thing you can do is keep at it if this is your passion. And a lot of the younger writers that I do know are branching out in ways that I have not. Yes, they're doing podcasts. They're writing young adult fiction. They're doing graphic novels, things like that. It's not just a matter of I'm going to write another sitcom script, or I'm going to write an episode of SpongeBob, or whatever it is. Yes, they're doing that stuff too, but they're saying, how else can I express myself? And what do I love? And it can be something in almost any medium. And then look at you, you've got another sample. If you write a novel and it gets published, again, not easily done, then you've got something you can hold in your hands, and it shows if you get a book published, even if it's an itty-bitty press run, it shows the people who are ostensibly hiring, oh, look, somebody else thought this was good enough to make a version. There must be something to it. So, you write a young adult novel, you get a little publisher to pick it up and do it. Then suddenly you have something that you can sell to television or film. And, hilarity ensues. And theoretically, so does compensation. But, one never knows, does one?
No, it's so weird how life can take us in different directions. As you've explained, it very much did for you, from wanting to do sitcoms to animation. How did that come about? That journey into animation.
Okay. Well, that introduction, but to show you how weird it gets,
Oh.
I was doing this struggling sitcom writer thing, and I was on a picket line for the Writers Guild in 1985, and I met a couple of story editors there. I thought nothing of it. Then I got hired at Disney on staff. 2 weeks after I signed my contract at Disney, those story editors, whom I had met months and months prior to that, called me up to find out find out about my availability. But being the Boy Scout I was, I said, oh no, I couldn't possibly. I just signed the contract. So that was the fork in the road for me. That was like, okay, the thing I wanted to do for 10 years, more than 10 years, suddenly was, I can't go there because I'm doing this. So I ended up being a cartoon writer. Totally an accident. It was an inadvertent second career, or 1.5 career or something. But it was like, that's not where I thought I'd end up. I mean, it makes sense because of all the stuff I'd watched growing up and my sort of natural sensibility for that kind of silly bit. But, you know, had you said to me when I was 17 and trying to write, you know, comedy plays and student films, oh, by the way, you're going to be a cartoon writer, I said, oh, really? But that's how it ended up. Life has, you know, its own way of, you know, messing with your plans. Like I say, it all worked out, but it was not where I expected to go. On balance, it worked out okay because, let's face it, had I stayed in sitcom and made something of a career, I would have aged out a long time before, because unless you're one of the big, you know, showrunner types, you know, you're no longer funny when your hair starts to turn gray. So by 40, I would have been sort of like yesterday's news. Instead, my use-by date got extended considerably because I was in cartoons and ageism wasn't as big a problem. I mean, it is now, but it wasn't that big a deal. So I got to work longer, and that was nice. So let that be a lesson to someone. I'm not sure to whom.
I mean, it certainly, you know, sounds like you ended up down the right path. You've worked on some absolutely iconic shows, one of which being Static Shock. What was that experience like?
Well, Static was, again, like I say, dumb luck timing who you know. I had worked with Alan Burnett back at Disney. We'd worked on a couple of different series, Tailspin and others, together. And Alan subsequently had left Disney to go over and run Batman the Animated Series at Warner Brothers. There was a brief interim step, but anyway, he was doing that, and then Superman series, all that other stuff. And so I had left Disney. I was doing some superhero stuff for my friend Eric Lewald, who was running the original X-Men series, and other things along the way. And Alan, who was, he's the sort of the undersung hero of Warner Brothers Animation, you know, a brilliant writer and a lovely fellow. I don't know if you've interviewed Alan, but anyway, he was supervising Static Shock, which was, as you probably know, based on a comic book series, the character Static, which was developed by Milestone Comics, which was run by 4 individuals, including Dennis Cowan, who ended up being a director on Static, and Dwayne McDuffie, who subsequently hired me on Ben 10, but that's a story, another story. Anyway, so I got to write freelance for Static Shock, and then I was on staff as a story editor, and then I was freelance again, and so I got a chance to do a bunch of those. And I think it's a show that holds up very, very well still. I was very proud of the work that we did on that. And the great thing about a show like Static, and then subsequently Ben 10, with a strong showrunner who's willing to go to bat and have you do a variety of different kinds of stories. So especially on, you know, on Static Shock, we could do big, silly comics like things, and we could do more serious social issues things, not to be pedantic, but just to say, well, this is important, this is about the human condition, and we want to tell these kinds of stories. Not everybody thinks that that's what animation should be. I was chastised for doing a story on Bonkers, called Quibbling Rivalry. It was about a rivalry between 2 sisters. And the guy in charge of the studio said, this is not the kind of story we should be telling. Well, okay, why not? Because the mandate from him was, we're going to be doing big, funny adventure shows. Everybody after the treasure, full stop. Okay, respectfully disagree, but got a chance to do those kinds of stories, certainly on X-Men, which, as you know, is all about, you know, social issues, cleverly disguised as people in spandex. And the same thing with Static Shock. We got a chance to tell stories. Alan and Dwayne McDuffie won a Humanitas Award for an episode about a kid bringing a gun to school. Does that sound like a big silly romp? No, it was very serious, and it was an award winner because it was about real life. I did one about a homeless girl and mental illness called Frozen Out. I mean, on Static. So you got a chance to do stories that were about real life, even though, yeah, there's a guy flying on a metal plate. You know, it's just when you have the kind of person who is willing to say, yeah, we're going to tell that kind of story too, as Dwayne did on the Ben 10 series. It's a thrill. We got a chance to tell stories that matter to us because, dirty little secret, we write to entertain ourselves, and we are just silly enough or arrogant enough to think that the opportunity, the privilege to tell stories that, you know, matter to us that's a tremendous gift. You know, cartoons, live action, whatever. It's how lucky we are to be able to do stories that you know, people care about. I mean, when I do panels at conventions, I still get stories about people come up after I'm doing a panel with Eric and his wife Julia and Larry Houston, who's the producer director on the original X-Men series. And people come up and say, that episode you did about Nightcrawler, that was so important to me. That I could talk about faith with my dad, and I could never talk about anything with him. And, you know, we hear these stories, and it's humbling. And, you know, the glib answer for all of us is, well, you know, when they say, oh, you made my childhood, we say, well, my condolences. But actually, it is the straight answer is how very lucky we are to do that, to make something that people remember fondly, even so many years later. I mean, we're talking here about Scooby Doo shows. They go back forever. I mean, you know, we were riding in ox carts when that show started. But it's like, how did that happen? I don't know. Like I say, I had no other skills, so I ended up doing this, and I got to work with brilliant, talented people. So on balance, it all worked out. I made a nice middle-class living writing for people, and now those people are watching it with their kids. How'd that happen? I don't know. It's very weird.
I agree with you. I think it's the best kind of media when it can also tell a more mature story. Because even if a kid is watching and doesn't necessarily get that at the time, if it's a good enough story as well, which of course Static was, like when you watch it, they can enjoy it. But then if they were to come back to it, or if a parent was watching with them, they could then enjoy that subtext, which I think is absolutely amazing. I think that's the best type of thing that everyone can enjoy, and that's incredible. And if there's something that is maybe, I guess you could call this a bit of a downer because it's a bit of logistics, but you know, I have come to the understanding that the reason why Static didn't go on for longer was because of the black lead, and it was a bit difficult to imagine people wanting to buy toys of black people. It almost makes me kind of weep thinking how many characters behind the scenes would have been black, but it was just the studio going, yeah, that probably isn't going to sell toys, let's change that. So do you think if Static were to come out now, it would have lasted longer? Or like, how do you feel like the climate of the world has changed since Static?
Well, let's see. First of all, I'd heard that story too, that they couldn't get a toy deal in there for him. And there was, yeah, I'm sure all sorts of behind the scenes machinations and corporate decisions that, you know, certainly above my pay grade. But, you know, to answer your question, I have two words: Black Panther. You know, I mean, come on.
Yeah.
One of the most successful movies in the Marvel canon. And yes, Static was a great character that everybody, regardless of what your personal background was, could identify with. I mean, come on, look, I'm an old white guy and I'm writing for a teenage African American with superpowers, so I could write from personal experience. No, but you know, if you write the show and direct the show and draw the show well enough, everybody's going to be on board. And it was, I believe, shall we say, short-sighted on the part of the people back in 2004 or whatever that was. Things change. You know, it's a pity. I think the thing that was sad for me was Dwayne McDuffie when he passed. I don't think he ever. I'm not sure. There was finally a grown-up static toy tied in with Justice League Unlimited, which was a show that it was a key showrunner on. I don't know if that toy came out before Dwayne passed, and that's a shame because, that was one of his many babies, and it would have been nice to be able to say, "Look what I've got in my hand."
Yeah, that's incredible.
Yeah. Anyway, so now I'm depressed, just like the rest of your listeners. Sorry about that. But anyway, yeah, we would like to have. It would have been nice for Static to go on because, if memory serves, and someone can correct me on this, the ratings for it were better in reruns than they were on the original broadcast on Kids WB. I mean, it was a big honking hit,
Mm.
and that wasn't recognized as such by the powers that be at the time.
I know that reboot and like revivals have kind of got a bad rep at the moment, but with X-Men 97 kind of being so critically acclaimed, like it's kind of really brought a prospect of a lot of like older cartoons, making a resurgence potentially. So who knows if at some point Static makes a comeback? That'd definitely be
Well,
interesting.
I'm happy to put my name out there, but again, yeah, I worked on the original X-Men series, but they did hire Eric Lee Walton, Julia Lee Walton, Larry Houston to serve as consultants. They were key people on the original series, and they are now consultants on this X-Men 97, which, by the way, is brilliantly done. It is, talk about big swings. I mean, I don't want to date this podcast too much, but we're close to the end of their first season, and it's astonishing what they're doing, and it's not a kiddie show. That's a very serious show. They have their funny bits too, but in terms of personalities of the characters, but wow, they're doing stuff that even we didn't think was possible. And Eric was pushing the envelope all the time on the original series too, but this is like wild. And may I point out, it also has probably 5 times the budget, or maybe more, of the original series, which was kind of done on the cheap, in its initial iteration. So good on them. They're doing everything that you would hope for in a reboot. They're not disappointing, that's for sure.
I completely agree, and definitely something that didn't disappoint me as a kid. This is one of my favorite things, and we were at like a car boot sale the other day. I guess you'd call it a yard sale, but we saw an array of Ben 10 toys, and I was just like, oh yeah, I used to have that one. Oh, there's 4 arms. I had that playset, and so I know that you've got like a great history of Ben 10, starting with Alien Force, Ultimate Alien Omniverse. Like, how did your journey with Ben 10 come about?
Well, once again, I was very fortunate. I had worked, as we've discussed, on Static Shock. Static was Dwayne McDuffie's co-creation. While I was working on Static Shock, he had moved to Los Angeles, started working on Justice League and Justice League Unlimited. And Dwayne, I don't know how much you know about him, but absolutely 6'7", huge guy. But more important, he was probably he was a bona fide genius. I mean, this is a guy who could, read 3 books in an evening. He could write faster than anybody. He was such a talent, huge, huge talent. Anyway, so he made a name for himself, moved up very quickly at Warner Brothers. Subsequent to his work on Justice League Unlimited, he then went over to the Cartoon Network and did the reboot, first version, iteration of Ben 10, slightly older, aged up, on Alien Force. And he apparently, fortunately, liked what I had done on Static Shock. So he was kind enough to hire me to start writing on his first and second versions of the Ben 10 series. And so I got a chance to write all in. I got a chance to write 24 Ben 10s for Dwayne. I think 18 under Alien Force and Ultimate Alien, and then subsequent to his tragic passing, then for his widow Charlotte Fullerton and Matt Wayne, whom I believe you've spoken with at one
Oh,
point.
yeah.
And Matt and Charlotte ran Omniverse. And so I got a chance to work on that show in 3 iterations, and I was had a great time there too. Again, we did big silly stuff there. Attack of the Night of either Attack of the or Night of the Living Brain Puppets was one of the things that I wrote. Hang on, no, that was static. I can't keep track. Hold on, I have to look at my notes because I truly cannot remember things because this was a long time ago and a lot of episodes.
I think there was like
Right.
a Attack of the Vreedles.
No, that was something else entirely. Somebody else's. Hold on. Oh, so embarrassing. I Anyway, there was a point and I've forgotten it, but I did get a chance to write a lot of funny things like Con of Wrath. And I wrote one that was kind of a interesting time sort of shifting episode of Moonstruck was the title of the episode. That was in I think in Alien Force, and that barely had Ben and Gwen in it. It was a flashback to Grandpa Max and his life as a crackerjack Air Force pilot running into a UFO. And that actually got me somewhere over there, a Writers Guild nomination. So I got a chance to do something that was totally offbeat. But then, I also did a dark one that had a murder or two in it called Catch a Falling Star. We got a chance to do all of this kind of stuff. Again, the whole gamut of, silly stuff and sci-fi adventure, and then weird one-offs, and again, that was because Dwayne was a fearless showrunner. He and the producing partner, Glenn Murakami, did wonderful work. But also we're just saying, well, let's do that. Or let's do the other thing. And we could really sort of, get into some really edgy, weird stuff. So that's you hope you're working for somebody who's willing to go to bat and say, yeah, that's an interesting idea. Let's go do that. Sometimes on all of these shows, it's an idea that I would come up with, pitching ideas for one episode or another. And sometimes they call you, and especially if you're a freelancer, and they say, okay, we've got this run of 5 episodes. We want you to do episode 3, and here's the stuff that it connects to, and you fill in the middle. And so, again, every new job is like the first day of school. You say, what's going on? Who am I today? And what am I doing for you? And if you're lucky, you do it well enough that they hire you again. It's a very, very weird way to earn a living, honestly.
It certainly is a great show, and like we said, still one that so many people do hold dear to their hearts. And it certainly sounds like for you there was a lot of memorable episodes and things with that show. But in terms of stepping in for Alien Force, and there been such a well-established, pre-existing character there, was there any sort of additional pressures or anything that you kind of had to do to approach it differently?
There might have been, but I was not aware of it. Again, I'm further down the food chain. So whatever debates were done during the course of development, I was not privy to any of that. So basically everything was up and running by the time Dwayne and Glenn were doing their bit on the show. So I just came in and I had not watched the original Ben 10 very much. I watched some episodes when I was brought in on Alien Force, but they said basically, don't worry about that. We're not doing that. We're doing this. So I didn't have to toe the line too much with respect to the other. There was some carryover, obviously, of characters, but as the series progressed, the relationships, the relationship with Kevin was very different on Alien Force than it was on the original series. So stuff changes over time, and I'm a good soldier and I do what I'm asked to do, and it all works out usually. Sometimes.
That makes sense, because I guess that make this question a little bit redundant as far as, I guess what you're told or what your thought processes are. But, I think for all there is some carryover from Alien Force from the original Ben 10, maybe more so of Ultimate Alien and Alien Force. I think when you look at Omniverse in a vacuum, it is almost like a reboot as such. There's like a whole art style which we love. There's a whole different status quo and cast of characters. And I do admit, when it first started airing, I was one of those people that were like, "Oh, I miss Gwen, I miss Kevin." But then by the end of it, Rook really did become one of my absolute favorite characters. And so, as we kind of was speaking about when we spoke to Matt Wayne, like how much is that kind of fan perception factored into the writing stage?
Well, again, the creative decisions that were made when they went from Ultimate Alien to Omniverse, not part of my experience. I was not there, and of course, this is sad again. Dwayne was developing Omniverse when he passed. And so then, can you imagine what it was like for Matt and Charlotte? Matt was one of Dwayne's very best friends, and Charlotte, obviously, his widow. So they have to pick up the ball and run with it with, with all of that emotional stuff associated with it. Plus, a new set of producers and directors on board and a decision to take the show in a different direction again, with a different style. Like I say, I was just there, to be a good infantryman, to say, I'll tell me what you want me to do, and I will do my best to do that. So, in terms of addressing, well, this character and that character, they're not in it or they're de-emphasized. Again, not a decision that I made, so I can't speak to what behind the scenes machinations took place. Sorry.
Oh, no problem at all. I'd like just was so sorry that there's so many like topics that are a little bit they've got like a kind of a somber undertone, But I think there's definitely some like good positivity to get from it in the fact that all these shows have lived for so long. And we've already lamented about Scooby, the fact that that started back in like 1969 and there's still iterations today. Like to me, that's just absolutely crazy. And of course, we can appreciate that this may be somewhat more of a briefer topic, but you did write, 2013 Scooby Doo and the Spooky Scarecrow, which is incredible. But, before that point, how familiar were you with the world of Scooby Doo?
Well, because I was alive. There was a television. I knew the characters. I knew the cast. Who couldn't? I mean, if you were somewhere in the Western world, you kind of knew who these people were because it's a great cast of characters, and it's like it's like a classical music. There's the way they do these shows for the most part. They're variations on a theme. So I didn't have to do a whole lot of heavy lifting on my one crack at a Scooby because, again, my friend Alan Burnett, still running the show at Warner Brothers, said that the great Paul Dini and his wife Misty Lee had written a story and they were too busy. So would you come in and write the teleplay, write the script? So I said, sure, you bet. So it wasn't hard to get up to speed on Scooby because, let's face it, it's just part of the cultural fabric. And they'd written a very solid story, obviously, with which I fiddled very little. Just had to sort of embellish and add whatever touches I could. But it wasn't like, gosh, what am I going to do about these characters? Because who doesn't know Ruh-roh? It's just we all know who these people are. That's the thing. If you've been at it for a while, you see. You have friends who've worked on all these shows. That helps. And you've watched them, and it's all about the cast of characters, regardless of who's doing the show or how they're drawing the characters or whatever it is. We all know the DuckTales characters, or in my case, the Rocky and Bullwinkle characters, or the Warner Brothers characters. Bugs Bunny, Daffy Duck, come on. They've been around since the 30s, right? So we all know who they are. And with Scooby, you've been around since the 60s. Oddly enough, I was alive during the 60s, and so I knew these characters pretty well. So it wasn't hard to jump on board for the very brief time. And it so happens that now you can correct me, you may know the history of it better than I, but my memory of it was they were doing a compilation home video. You remember home video. And so they needed to have one more segment for that compilation DVD. So that's why the Scarecrow episode got made. Maybe you know differently. I'm sure it aired somewhere subsequently, but all I know is I've got it on my shelf because that's what I thought it was supposed to be part of. Pardon my syntax. But yeah, it was like, and it was very well made. Again, people that I had worked with on various other shows, running the show, Vic Cook and Alan Burnett and all those guys doing, what they were doing on Scooby and other things at Warner Brothers. So, again, great production values, well directed, obviously a terrific cast. I how much could I screw this up? I tried not to, but it all worked out. I think it's a good episode. But that's
Oh, it's amazing. I don't think, in such a short time to make such a big impact is incredible for most people, most Scooby fans anyway. This is still a go-to Halloween staple. It's something that every October Scooby fans will put on. Was it ever given to you as a brief that this was gonna, lean to being a Halloween special? Were there any kind of prerequisites of we want certain things included to give it that sort of narrative?
No, I mean, again, Paul and Misty had already written the story, so whatever marching orders there were associated with this is going to be a Halloween episode and it will be a perennial. I didn't really, I got off easy because they said, hey, look, here's this and here's the other thing, and can we have it by next Tuesday? That's sometimes the freelance thing is, you're struggling to try to get the next assignment, and sometimes it's handed to you. Thank God for Alan Burnett doing that for me several times over the course of my career. So it all worked out. But gosh, I'm glad it's, I did not know that people actually sort of have it on their seasonal rotation, but that's great. I hope it gives people, something to laugh over while they're eating their, mallow cups or whatever.
Yeah, Scooby snacks in that case, probably.
Specifically, I should say Scooby snacks. Yes, trademark. But yeah, that's great. Again, better than I do how much or how little this thing is watched or how much it's part of the giant Scooby canon. I'm glad it's an asterisk, in the rundown of episodes, but not through no effort of mine. I mean, I got the right for it, which was great.
Well, it definitely is absolutely incredible, and it's all around so amazing how things last the test of time. And I guess this question could apply to Scooby Doo, but also just so many other things. Like to you, when there's something that has gone on from, say, the 60s and is still running now, be it the same iteration or different iterations, what do you think is the hallmark of something that is bound to last the test of time?
Good question. I must admit I have not given a whole lot of thought to this, but off the top of my head, I think it's because it's kind of like comfort food, certainly, but it's also, it's like what you grew up with, when you're talking about Scooby or DuckTales or X-Men or anything like that. It's like it's associated with your childhood or young adulthood. It's comforting, it's familiar, and of course the biggest part of it is you like the characters. You I mean, you mentioned sitcoms. I mean, everybody loves the cast of Friends. Everybody loves the cast of The Big Bang Theory. Well, not everybody, but millions and millions of people. I can watch an episode of Big Bang and say, look at how brilliantly this is written. I mean, more jokes per page than you can count. But we all know these characters, and so you can drop in any time, and that's what these characters are. They're family. It's a strange kind of thing that a talking dog and a guy who probably has had a few too many brownies. They're your wacky relatives. And they drive around in a van, and they meet people who said, if only those kids hadn't interfered, I would be a billionaire or a former president or anything. It's just. Sorry, I shouldn't talk politics, but anyway, you see these characters and you say, yeah, I love those guys. So you're there. There's an emotional resonance to it, and also it's funny stuff, and we all want to laugh because life can be hard if you don't have something to laugh about. And Scooby Doo, that cast, or any of the other casts that you mentioned, X-Men, that's serious drama or melodrama or whatever, but people care about these characters so much. And you want to say, okay, well, there must be a reason. And it's because we all, are those of us who are fortunate to do this for a living, we're writing something that matters to us. And it's, I hope, reflected in, the audience response. So again, I'm sort of talking in circles here, but we're all in this together. We're all writing or watching something that resonates emotionally. So, what a weird thing to do as a career, but also isn't it lovely that we can all sort of share in that collective experience?
Yeah, I think it was said, I don't know where this was said, but it very much ties into what you were saying, that it was like when you put something on with the family, be it for when you're eating dinner or something, you're very much like inviting other people to sit around the table with you. Like if you're finishing school and you're having dinner and you're essentially having dinner with Shaggy, Scooby, Daphne, Velma, and Fred, and then to have that and grow up with that, it can very much seem like that family dynamic, which I think you summed up perfectly. So that's absolutely incredible. Thank you so much for that. And yeah, that's just amazing. But to get into the stage of kind of wrapping things up now, are you currently working on anything either new or upcoming that you can speak about?
Well, the things there was a little thing like the strike that got in the way for a while, but the things that my current projects, I have a lovely, touching comedy drama, sort of an independent movie, but make a lovely TV movie. And I also have a wacky sitcom that's set in a struggling animation studio. Write what you know. But and then there's some other things that I'm working on, screenplays, but way too early to be talking about them. But everybody cross your fingers and hope that I can find somebody. If anybody watching this is friends with, like, I don't know, Mark Ruffalo or Nick Offerman, I have a wonderful part for one of them, and call me. I'm easy to find.
I mean, speaking of being easy to find, where is the best place for people to follow or keep up and follow on with the work that you're doing?
Well, I stalk on Instagram. I don't use it much, but I watch what other people are doing. At Len Uhley is my Twitter handle. So at Lenuhley. It's hard to spell, but I'm stuck with it. Facebook is for friends and family, so not there. But yeah, I can be found on Twitter and on LinkedIn if anybody's offering employment. So I'm easy that way. But yeah, I am findable in the world. None of us have any privacy or secrets anymore, do we? In the era of social media. So yeah, that's the best way.
Oh, that's fabulous. I'll leave them linked in the description down below. But of course, that does conclude all the questions that we had for you today. Just thank you so, so much for coming on and being so open with your stories, because it's been absolutely incredible and we've had such a wonderful time speaking with you.
Oh, you're very kind. Thank you for having me. I do appreciate it, and I'll look forward to watching this whenever the heck it's on.
Well, thank you so much. And of course, thank you so much to everybody watching. Please make sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and we'll see you next time.